Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. Have you ever wondered if you ever wish to transmigrate? You should be very specific about where you want to end up. Otherwise, you might wake up inside a novel as the one character you did never want to become. Well, that's exactly what happened to today's protagonist, Luca Martin. After dying in an accident, Luca transmigrates into his favorite novel, but as the doomed love rival, destined to die at the male lead's hands, determined to survive, he decides to become the male lead's cupid instead. But the more he tries to push the male lead towards the heroine, the more obsessed the male lead becomes with him. Now, let's fasten your seatbelts because this transmigration story is about to take a very unexpected turn. And before diving in, don't forget to check out my Patreon page for early access and bonus and epilogue scenes. Then, let's begin the story. Happy listening, everyone.
Chapter 1. I transmigrated as the love rival with a doomed fate. Luca Martin never thought life could be this unfair. He worked as an accountant in a company he hated with every fiber of his being. Every morning he woke up, questioned his life choices, sighed dramatically at the ceiling of his tiny apartment, and still went to work because rent wasn't going to pay itself. Being an adult was truly a scam. He was quiet, calm, gentle. Unfortunately, his coworkers translated those qualities into easy target. Every single day they dumped extra work on him, mocked him, stole credit for his reports, and laughed whenever he stayed silent. Luca won't say anything. He's too soft. He's basically a pushover. Luca heard every single word. Did it make him angry? Absolutely. Did he show it? No, not because he couldn't. Because he knew there was no point. Once he even complained to his manager. The woman listened carefully, before laughing right in his face. Oh, Luca, they're just joking. Then she joined them. That day, Luca understood something very important. Human resources wasn't human. After another exhausting day, he'd drag himself back to his tiny apartment, collapse onto his couch, order cheap takeout, and escape reality by reading novels. That was his favorite hobby. Today's novel was no different. Two ridiculously handsome alpha business tycoons. One beautiful omega heroine. One tragic love triangle. The male lead, Antonio Landolfi. The second male lead, Luca Di Pietro. Both fought over Omega Susanna Giulia. In the end, Antonio won. Di Pietro died, killed by Antonio's men while still hopelessly loving Giulia. Luca cried over the chapter. After all, they both shared the same name. Then he angrily cursed the author. What was the point of making him so handsome if you were just going to kill him? He sniffled dramatically. I would have chosen Di Pietro. 5 minutes later, he was crying again. He loved stories that emotionally punched him in the face. He also hated them. It was a very toxic relationship. Sometimes, while staring at the ceiling, he'd mutter, if I ever transmigrate into a novel, please, let it be a peaceful one. Clearly, the universe heard only the first half. Days passed. Weeks passed. Nothing changed. The bullying only became worse. Until one ordinary Tuesday. Luca smiled, a very gentle smile. The kind that made everyone think, ah, look how harmless he is, how adorable. He had finally reached his limit. He wasn't weak, he wasn't stupid, and he certainly wasn't incapable of talking back. He simply believed that some people weren't worth arguing with. But revenge, now that was worth his time. If he got angry, he never left things halfway. He wanted to resign anyway. So before leaving, he decided to give everyone a farewell gift, a memorable one. Everything went exactly as planned. 1 hour earlier, Luca had quietly disabled several security cameras on his floor. He also used portable signal jammers to block mobile reception inside the conference area. The company proudly advertised its newest soundproof meeting rooms. Luca silently applauded their investment. Excellent quality. Very convenient. He politely invited every coworker, and even his dear manager, into the largest conference room under the excuse of discussing an urgent financial discrepancy. Everyone entered. Because why wouldn't they? It was Luca, sweet, naive, harmless Luca. The moment the last person stepped inside, click, the heavy electronic doors locked. Luca? One of them frowned. Another tried opening the door, locked. Their expressions slowly changed. Luca, what are you doing? Open the door. Luca stood outside the glass wall, smiling innocently. So noisy. His voice remained soft. I only wanted everyone together. His manager slammed against the glass. Have you gone insane? Luca tilted his head. I don't think so. He looked genuinely thoughtful. I actually feel surprisingly peaceful. Someone began kicking the door. Others screamed. Some started threatening him. Some apologized. We're sorry. We'll never bully you again. Please let us out. Luca watched them quietly, then smiled even brighter. If apologies fixed everything, the world would have been a wonderful place. Their faces slowly turned pale, especially after Luca calmly walked toward the electrical panel nearby. Earlier that morning, he had already tampered with several overloaded power lines. Now, he simply flipped one switch, sparks, tiny at first, then crack. A burst of electricity raced across damaged wiring. Smoke began filling the room. Someone screamed. Someone started crying. Several desperately threw themselves against the reinforced doors. The soundproof room worked wonderfully. No one outside heard a thing. Luca honestly felt impressed. 5 stars. Would recommend. The fire alarms had also mysteriously failed to activate. What unfortunate timing. Luca folded his hands behind his back, watching quietly. For years, he had endured humiliation, insults, laughter, helplessness. Today, he simply watched, without saying another word. Eventually, he turned around and walked away. His footsteps were slow, calm, almost relaxed. For the first time in years, his chest felt light, very light. He climbed onto the rooftop to enjoy a little fresh air. Below him, faint smoke slowly rose from the building. Soon people would notice. Soon firefighters would arrive. Soon everything would become absolute chaos. Luca stretched lazily. Finally, I can resign with peace of mind. Then, curiosity got the better of him. He stepped closer to the edge to look down. Huh? The rooftop was higher than he expected. His foot landed on loose gravel. Eh? His balance disappeared instantly. His eyes widened. Oh! He tipped forward. Wind roared past his ears. As the ground rushed closer, Luca let out one last dry laugh. Seriously? After surviving all that? I died because I'm clumsy. He stared at the sky. You know, this ending sucks. Darkness swallowed him whole. Soft mattress, silk blankets, a luxurious chandelier. Luca slowly blinked. He sat upright. His mouth slowly fell open. The bedroom alone looked bigger than his entire apartment. He looked left. He looked right. Then dramatically placed a hand over his chest. Heaven? No way, he gasped. Since when did heaven start giving premium subscriptions? He nodded seriously. I approve. I suffered enough. I deserve this VIP treatment. Feeling incredibly pleased with himself, Luca wandered around the room like a tourist. Oh ho! Marble floor? Expensive furniture. This pillow probably costs more than my monthly salary. He grinned smugly. See? I told everyone I'm destined for greatness. Then, he walked past a full-length mirror, stopped, walked backward, stared. His first reaction confusion, second shock, third realization, fourth pure, unfiltered, soul leaving the body horror, all within 1 minute. He grabbed both cheeks, half shouted, I literally transmigrated into the novel. His voice echoed across the room. No, 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 universe. When I wished to transmigrate, I meant into some slice of life novel. Maybe one where I inherit a cafe. Or become a billionaire with zero plot. I forgot to specify. He dramatically slapped his own forehead. This is why details matter. After pacing in circles for several minutes, he finally calmed down enough to organize his thoughts. The face in the mirror belonged to Alpha Luca Di Pietro, the second most influential business tycoon in the country. Antonio Landolfi was number 1. Di Pietro was number 2. College rivals, business rivals, love rivals, both hopelessly entangled around Omega Susanna Julia. And according to the novel, years of rivalry eventually ended with Antonio ordering his men to kill Di Pietro. Luca remembered reading that chapter from Di Pietro's point of view. He had cried so hard that night, then cursed Antonio for another 20 minutes. Unfortunately, he never finished the novel. The final chapters were still unread, which meant he had absolutely no idea what happened after Di Pietro died. Fantastic. I'm living inside a story whose ending I don't even know. He looked toward the ceiling. I'd like to file a complaint. Silence answered him. Rude. After another dramatic sigh, Luca accepted reality. Complaining wouldn't send him back. He already possessed some of Di Pietro's memories, enough to manage his new identity. Good. One less headache. He crossed his arms confidently. Fine. If fate insists on throwing me into this novel, then I'm changing the script. He pointed dramatically at absolutely nobody. I refuse to become Antonio Landolfi's love rival. I already know how that movie ends. No thank you. Instead, a mischievous smile spread across his face. I'll personally play Cupid. I'll push Antonio and Susanna together. I'll make sure Di Pietro survives. Then he proudly placed both hands on his hips. What could possibly go wrong? Somewhere, fate silently laughed. Chapter 2. Playing Cupid starts. But why is the male lead looking at me like that? A week passed in the blink of an eye. Luca spent those 7 days doing 3 things. First, learning how to run the enormous Di Pietro group. Second, sorting through Alpha Luca Di Pietro's memories. And third, panicking every few hours because he suddenly remembered, wait, I'm rich now. Every time he checked his bank account, he had to remind himself not to faint. So this is what financial stability feels like. I approve. Thankfully, Di Pietro's memories made things much easier. He wasn't completely clueless anymore. Now, only one thing remained: meeting the protagonist of the novel, Antonio Landolfi. The business meeting was arranged at Landolfi Group. Luca took one deep breath before entering. Stay calm. Don't fight. Don't die. Playing Cupid begins today. He confidently pushed open the conference room doors. Huh? The first thing he saw wasn't Antonio. It was Susanna Giulia practically hanging onto Antonio's arm. Antonio, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to politely throw her across the room. He kept trying to remove her hand without embarrassing her. Unfortunately, Giulia's grip rivaled industrial glue. Luca blinked. Ah. They're already flirting. Excellent. My work is half done. Antonio looked up. Their eyes met. He instinctively prepared himself for Di Pietro's usual sarcastic remarks. Instead, Luca smiled. A warm, gentle, heart-melting smile. Good morning. I hope I didn't keep you waiting. Silence. Antonio froze. Giulia slowly raised an eyebrow. Was this really Luca Di Pietro? The same Di Pietro who usually walked into meetings ready to declare war? Where was the shouting? Where was the arguing? Where were the passive-aggressive insults? Antonio unconsciously kept staring. Luca was smiling. And he looked ridiculously beautiful while doing it. Antonio felt his heartbeat skip. Interesting. The meeting itself went surprisingly smoothly. No arguments, no sarcastic comments, no table-slamming competitions. The contract was signed peacefully. Even the secretaries looked emotional. History had been made. As Antonio and Susanna stood to leave, Mr. Landolfi. Antonio turned. Luca stood up. Then, to everyone's complete disbelief, he bowed his head slightly. I wanted to apologize. Antonio frowned. Apologize? Luca smiled sheepishly. I've caused enough misunderstandings between the two of you. So from today onward, I won't be your rival anymore. Antonio blinked. Luca continued cheerfully. I'll become your friend. And your Cupid. Giulia's cheeks turned pink. How thoughtful. How considerate. What a gentleman. Antonio, however, completely ignored every single word after I'll become your friend. Friend? Friend? His expression became strange. Then Luca smiled again. Antonio forgot how breathing worked. He smiles like this. Since when? For some unknown reason. Antonio suddenly didn't like the word Cupid. Meanwhile, Luca was incredibly proud of himself. Excellent start. Mission Matchmaker has officially begun. He even mentally gave himself a gold star. Step 1. Romantic dinner. Luca personally reserved the most luxurious candlelight restaurant in the city. Soft music, rose petals, private balcony, perfect. He happily called Antonio. Everything's ready. Antonio arrived. Giulia arrived. Luca smiled proudly. My work here is done. He stood up. I'll leave you two alone. Antonio calmly picked up another menu. Sit. Luca blinked. Oh, why? Antonio looked completely serious. What if the food is poisoned? What? You should stay. As food taster? No. As company? Luca stared. Romantic dinners usually don't include third wheels. Antonio simply poured him tea. Luca sighed. Maybe rich people date differently. Attempt number 2. Luxury yacht cruise. This time Luca was smarter. He secretly booked only 2 tickets. Perfect. Foolproof. Antonio arrived, looked at the tickets, then casually bought a third one. For Luca. Luca nearly cried. Why? Attempt number 3. Charity gala. Luca deliberately disappeared after introducing Antonio and Julia. 10 minutes later, Antonio found him. There you are. How did you find me? Antonio answered honestly. I looked. That somehow made even less sense. Weeks passed. Antonio and Luca unexpectedly became close friends. The rivalry everyone expected never happened. Instead, the two business tycoons could often be seen drinking coffee together, playing golf, discussing investments, arguing over coffee brands. Even gossip magazines became confused. Business rivals? Best friends? Enemies? Married? Nobody knew anymore. Antonio himself seemed happy. I'm glad we're friends again. He said it so naturally that Luca almost felt guilty. Fortunately, Luca interpreted it exactly the wrong way. See? The original Di Pietro really caused unnecessary drama. Look how happy Antonio is now that I'm helping him date Julia. Luca proudly nodded to himself. Excellent work, Cupid. Then, Antonio started appearing at Di Pietro Group. Without appointments, without reasons, without shame. I'm here to check on my friend. The receptionists immediately let him in. It happened so often that employees stopped announcing him. One afternoon, Antonio canceled a multi-billion-dollar negotiation. His assistant nearly fainted. Sir, the clients are waiting. Antonio didn't even look up. Through the office glass wall, he was quietly watching Luca negotiate with a difficult contractor. No. I'll stay. The assistant looked like his soul had left his body. Sir, that deal is worth billions. Antonio calmly sipped his coffee. This is more interesting. Inside the office, the contractor was trying to bully Luca. Unlike Di Pietro's original explosive temper, this Luca simply smiled, then politely destroyed every single argument with pure logic. The contractor eventually left looking like he'd lost custody of his confidence. Antonio smiled unconsciously. Cute. His assistant almost dropped the coffee tray. Unfortunately, someone else noticed. Susanna. Her smile stiffened slightly. Antonio used to spend this much time with her. Now, he barely looked at her. Instead, his eyes constantly searched for Luca. Luca noticed it too. Antonio visited him almost every day, always watched him, always smiled at him. Sometimes, Antonio would quietly stare for several minutes without speaking. Luca became increasingly uncomfortable. Why does he keep looking at me? Did I forget to button my shirt? Do I have sauce on my face? One day, he even checked himself in the mirror 5 times. Nothing. Completely normal. I'm overthinking. He nodded confidently. Antonio loves Susanna. He definitely isn't staring because of me. Definitely. Trying to help things further, Luca even changed his wardrobe. Gone were Di Pietro's intimidating black suits. Now he wore softer colors, gentler styles, more approachable. Less like a rival, more like background decoration. He admired himself proudly. Perfect. Nobody could mistake me for the male lead's love rival now. Meanwhile, Antonio walked into the office, saw Luca, stopped walking. His pupils darkened slightly. Today, Luca somehow looked even more attractive. Antonio quietly loosened his tie. This was becoming dangerous, very dangerous, completely unaware of the storm brewing. Luca happily crossed another item off his imaginary checklist. Become friends with Antonio. Help Antonio pursue Julia. His smile widened. Everything is going according to plan. Somewhere nearby, Antonio silently watched him with eyes filled with fascination, possessiveness, and a growing obsession. The plan was indeed going according to plan, just not Luca's plan. Chapter 3. Jealous Hearts, Possessive Actions, and a Confession that changed everything. Several months slipped by. Without anyone realizing it, Antonio Landolfi and Luca Di Pietro had somehow become inseparable. If Antonio attended a business banquet, Luca would somehow be there. If Luca went golfing, Antonio mysteriously had free time. If Luca sneezed, Antonio's assistant somehow already had medicine prepared. The assistant had long since given up asking questions. His salary wasn't high enough for this romance. One afternoon, the three of them were having lunch together. Luca suddenly sighed. "I think it's time I found a partner." Julia smiled elegantly. "Of course, you shouldn't stay single forever." Luca nodded seriously. "I know, right? I'm handsome, rich, kind, and emotionally available." Antonio silently put down his coffee. His smile disappeared. His eyes darkened almost imperceptibly. Neither Luca nor Julia noticed. One was too dense. The other was too busy smiling. Exactly 2 weeks later, Luca went on his very first blind date. The man sitting across from him was polite, handsome, well-mannered, and worked as an architect. Excellent. Normal job. Normal personality. No murderous tendencies. Luca was very satisfied. Just as he was about to ask the man another question, a familiar voice interrupted. What a coincidence. Luca slowly turned his head. Antonio. Antonio casually pulled out a chair, sat beside Luca, crossed one leg over the other. I'm here to inspect him. Inspect? Antonio looked at the poor architect. What are your annual earnings? Excuse me? Any criminal record? No? Blood type? Why? Can you cook? Somewhat. Antonio nodded thoughtfully. I see. Then he looked at Luca. He can't cook well enough. The architect stared. Luca stared. Antonio continued calmly. What are your long-term financial plans? The poor man looked ready to cry. 5 minutes later, he stood up. I suddenly remembered I have work. Before Luca could stop him, the man practically sprinted out of the restaurant. Luca watched his disappearing back, then slowly turned toward Antonio. Antonio smiled innocently. What? Luca rubbed his forehead. My friend has become really strange. Antonio simply sipped his coffee. Mission accomplished. Unfortunately, someone had witnessed everything. Julia. She watched Antonio laugh with Luca. Smile only at Luca. Look only at Luca. It felt like someone was slowly crushing her heart. For years, she had convinced herself Antonio would eventually fall for her. Now, she finally understood. He never would, because his entire world had quietly begun revolving around Luca. Her nails dug into her palms. No, she refused to lose. A few days later, at one of the biggest corporate charity banquets of the year, Julia finally exploded. Hundreds of influential businessmen and reporters filled the ballroom. Without warning, Julia's voice echoed across the hall. Luca Di Pietro. Everyone turned. She walked toward him with tears in her eyes. You've been seducing Antonio this entire time. Gasps echoed everywhere. You pretended to help us, but you stole him from me. I trusted you. The reporters nearly fainted from excitement. Tomorrow's headlines were writing themselves. Luca blinked. Huh? His brain completely stopped functioning. Excuse me? When did I do that? I've literally been playing Cupid. Did I accidentally play reverse Cupid? Before Luca could defend himself, a familiar pair of footsteps echoed through the silent hall. Antonio. His expression was terrifyingly cold. He didn't even spare Julia a glance who was crying. He walked straight toward Luca, stopped, reached out, and gently grabbed Luca's wrist. Then, without another word, he pulled Luca behind him. His cold gaze finally landed on Julia. Antonio's voice was calm, is mine to handle. Silence. Absolute silence. The entire banquet hall forgot how to breathe. One sentence. Only one sentence. And every newspaper in the country just found tomorrow's front page. Antonio ignored everyone. Still holding Luca's wrist, he calmly walked out, dragging one utterly confused alpha behind him. Inside Luca's mansion, Antonio finally let go. Luca immediately turned around. Antonio, what exactly? Sit. Bossy, Luca muttered under his breath before sitting on the couch anyway. Antonio knelt before him, then, very gently, held both of Luca's hands. His expression softened completely. I love you. Luca's brain blue screened. Loading. Loading. System error. Please restart. What? Antonio chuckled softly. I expected that reaction. Luca blinked several times, then pointed at himself. Me? Antonio nodded. You? Not Susanna? Antonio looked genuinely confused. Why would it be Susanna? Excuse me? Antonio sighed helplessly. Luca. I've never loved Susanna. Not even once. Luca's mouth slowly fell open. Antonio continued patiently. The day we first met, I told her very clearly that I only saw her as a friend. She agreed. I thought everything was settled. Luca looked like his soul had quietly left his body. What? Then what was that entire novel about? Antonio tilted his head. Tell me. Have you ever actually heard me say I loved her? Luca froze. He searched his memories. Yeah? No. Come to think of it, Antonio never confessed. Never called Susanna his girlfriend. Never even hinted at loving her. It was always Susanna saying it. Antonio smiled helplessly. When your personality suddenly changed, I became curious, then intrigued, then fascinated. And before I realized it, I fell in love. Luca silently listened. Antonio's ears turned slightly red. And you're my fated mate. What? Antonio coughed awkwardly. I think you forgot to wear your scent patch one day. That's when I realized. Luca slowly covered his face. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Even fate has joined this circus. Antonio squeezed his hands gently. 10 months ago, at our first meeting, I wanted to tell you everything. But before I could, you happily announced you were going to become our cupid. Luca immediately remembered. Oh. Antonio laughed. I tried stopping you. You never listened. You kept arranging dates, dinners, trips, charity events. I've suffered enough. Luca looked away awkwardly. Sorry? Antonio smiled. No. I'm done being a coward. I'll pursue you openly from now on. If I had confessed earlier, Susanna would have never dared hurt you today. Antonio slowly stood up. I'm going to talk to her. It's time she understands where the line is. Luca instantly jumped up. Wait, Antonio, don't do anything reckless. Unfortunately, Antonio had already left. The mansion became completely silent. Luca slowly sat back onto the couch. He stared blankly at the ceiling. I think the plot has resigned. He buried his face into a pillow. So, I accidentally became the protagonist? How does someone even do that? His poor brain officially declared bankruptcy. Eventually, he gave up thinking. I'm sleeping. Future Luca can handle this. Present. Luca had suffered enough. When Luca opened his eyes again, he wasn't in his bedroom. He stood inside a vast white space that stretched endlessly in every direction. Where am I now? Suddenly, boing. Something fluffy bounced onto his shoulder. Luca screamed. Ah! The fluffy creature screamed too. Ah! Both of them stared at each other. The creature looked like an impossibly round cotton ball with tiny floating paws, snow-white fur, bright galaxy blue eyes, tiny golden ears, little wings no bigger than leaves, and a puffball tail that bounced every time it moved. It looked less like a godly system, and more like an overgrown mochi. The tiny fluff puffed out its cheeks. That was rude. I'm very adorable, Luca pointed dramatically. You can talk? So can you. Fair. The fluffy creature proudly floated higher. I am System 001. The great, handsome, intelligent, elegant, magnificent. Okay. Luca waved both hands. We get it. The little fluff pouted. You interrupted my introduction. Luca folded his arms. So, you're the culprit? System 001 blinked. Maybe? You transmigrated me? Yes. Why? The fluffy ball happily wagged its tiny tail. I once heard you saying you wanted to transmigrate into a novel. So I fulfilled your wish. Luca stared. He, then pointed an accusing finger. I meant a peaceful novel. A cafe owner. A farming simulator. A slice of life romance. Not this death trap. System 001 lowered its little ears. Oops. It looked so pitiful that Luca couldn't even stay angry. He sighed deeply. Fine. Then his expression became serious. Explain. Why has the plot completely changed? The fluffy system awkwardly scratched its tiny face. Funny story. It was a system error. Luca narrowed his eyes. Go on. When I sent you here, I accidentally registered you as the protagonist. You what? So now, the main couple is Antonio Landolfi and Luca Di Pietro. Luca nearly fainted. How? The original Di Pietro literally died because of Antonio. System 001 only smiled mysteriously. You never finished the novel. So, you only know half the truth. Luca froze. Half? The fluffy system nodded. The real truth will reveal itself when the time is right. And don't worry. The real Luca Di Pietro's soul is living happily in your original world now, in your original body. He finally has the peaceful life you always wished for. So, System 001 smiled warmly. You should make this world your home too. Before Luca could ask another question, everything turned white again. Luca suddenly jolted awake in his own bed. A dream? No. It had felt far too real. He stared quietly at the ceiling. Now, he finally had answers. Some answers. But the biggest mystery remained. What was the other half of the original novel? After several minutes of silence, Luca finally smiled to himself. Whatever the truth is, I'll find it myself. Then his eyes became determined. Antonio loved him. Maybe, perhaps, possibly. But Luca wasn't the emotional fool the original Di Pietro had been. He believed in one simple rule. Precaution is always better than cure. If Antonio truly loves me, he'll prove it. And only then, I'll decide whether he's worthy of becoming my partner. Somewhere else in the city, Antonio Landolfi sneezed. His assistant looked concerned. Sir, are you all right? Antonio smiled for no reason at all. I think my future husband is thinking about me. The assistant silently closed his notebook. He was definitely not paid enough for this. Chapter 4. Courting the love rival and their happy, chaotic ending. After leaving Luca's mansion that night, Antonio headed straight for Julia. The moment she saw him, her face lit up with delight. Antonio, I knew you'd come back. She couldn't even finish her sentence. Antonio grabbed her wrist tightly, his usually gentle eyes colder than ice. Listen carefully. This is the first and the last warning I'm giving you. If you ever hurt Luca again, I'll forget we were ever friends. I won't spare you. Julia stared at him in disbelief before tears welled in her eyes. Why? Why can't it be me? I've loved you for years. Why can't you love me? Antonio's expression didn't change. Because I never have. I told you the day we first met. I only ever saw you as a friend. You agreed not to cross that line. But you're the one breaking your promise. Julia bit her lip until it bled. On the surface, she nodded pitifully. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Antonio finally released her wrists and left without another glance. The moment the door closed, her tears disappeared. A twisted smile slowly spread across her face. Her eyes burned with jealousy. With obsession, with madness. If I can't have Antonio, neither can Luca. Meanwhile, Luca's peaceful life officially disappeared. Not because of danger. Because of Antonio. Every single morning, fresh flowers arrived. Every single afternoon. Antonio personally delivered lunch. Every single evening. Antonio somehow appeared outside Di Pietro group. Coincidence, he always claimed. Luca no longer believed in coincidences. The internet wasn't helping either. Breaking news, the two business rivals are secretly living together. Luca nearly choked on his coffee. We're not. The reporters nodded seriously. So you're admitting you're together? No. Antonio casually wrapped an arm around Luca's shoulders. We're getting there. Flash, flash, flash. Cameras exploded. Luca wanted to explode too. He glared at Antonio. Stop making things worse. Antonio smiled innocently. I didn't say anything wrong. You literally did. At another elite corporate masquerade gala, Luca came fully prepared. Silver mask, different hairstyle, formal white suit, even a different perfume. He confidently nodded to himself. Perfect. He'll never recognize me. 3 minutes later, a familiar voice whispered beside his ear. You can hide your face. Antonio gently leaned closer. But never from me. Luca froze. How? Antonio smiled. You're sent. Luca immediately remembered. Right? My mate. Antonio chuckled. Caught you. Luca sighed dramatically. There goes another brilliant plan. Unlike before, Antonio never confessed again. He simply showed it. Every day, every action, every little detail. Whenever Luca looked tired, Antonio was already handing him coffee. Whenever Luca skipped lunch, Antonio somehow knew. Whenever Luca frowned, Antonio immediately asked, Who upset you? Luca couldn't understand how someone so cold toward the rest of the world could become such a lovesick fool around him. Then, one rainy evening, Luca got into a minor car accident. Fortunately, he only suffered a few bruises. Unfortunately, Antonio acted as though Luca had lost all 4 limbs. Luca, does it hurt? Should we call another doctor? No. A specialist? No. 3 specialists. Luca sighed. I bumped my shoulder. Antonio looked heartbroken. You could have bumped it harder. That wasn't comforting. For the next 3 weeks, Antonio refused to leave Luca's side. He personally fed him, reminded him to take medicine, carried him downstairs despite Luca insisting he could walk. I have legs. I know, so let me use them. No. Antonio. No. Even the doctors whispered among themselves. Sir? He's perfectly healthy now. Antonio nodded. I know. Then why are you still carrying him? Antonio looked completely serious. Because I can. Luca covered his face. This man has no shame. Meanwhile, Antonio secretly ordered a full investigation into the accident. At first, he believed one of their business enemies had targeted Luca. Every security camera along the route was examined. Every witness was questioned. The damaged car was taken apart piece by piece. His men worked day and night. 3 days later, one of Antonio's subordinates entered his office. Boss, it wasn't an accident. Antonio slowly looked up. Continue. The brakes were deliberately tampered with. And, the subordinate hesitated, we traced the person who paid the mechanic. A photograph was placed on the desk. Antonio's expression instantly turned ice cold. It was Susanna Julia. Antonio went to meet Julia that very evening. She smiled happily the moment she saw him. Antonio, I knew you would come. Before she could finish, Antonio threw the file onto the table. Photographs, bank transfers, security footage, witness statements. Every piece of evidence was there. His voice was frighteningly calm. You tampered with Luca's car. It wasn't enough that you framed him. You wanted him dead. For a brief moment, Julia remained silent. Then, she laughed. Not a normal laugh, a hysterical, almost insane laugh. So what if I did? Her eyes were bloodshot with obsession. You should have belonged to me. I loved you. I waited for you. But all you ever looked at was Luca. If he disappeared, you would have come back to me. Antonio looked at her with complete disappointment. There wasn't even anger left. Only disgust. You've gone mad. Julia smiled crazily. I became mad because of you. Antonio turned toward the guards waiting outside. Take her away. Admit her to the highest security psychiatric hospital. And make sure... He looked at Julia one last time. She never escapes. The guards immediately restrained her. She screamed. She cried. She cursed Luca. She begged Antonio to look at her just once. Antonio never turned back, not even once. From that day onward, the woman who had once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Landolfi disappeared from the business world forever. When Antonio returned home that evening, he found Luca peacefully sleeping on the sofa with a blanket wrapped around him. His expression instantly softened. He gently brushed a strand of hair away from Luca's forehead and whispered with a helpless smile, I promised you that no harm would ever come near you again. And this time, I kept my promise. And slowly, very slowly, the walls around Luca's heart began crumbling. Antonio had kept every promise. He never forced him, never pressured him, never lied to him. He simply stayed. No matter how difficult Luca made the courtship. And Luca made it very difficult. Antonio was rejected, ignored, teased, sent home, made to wait for hours, dragged around shopping malls, forced to taste Luca's terrible cooking, and somehow, Antonio survived everything. One afternoon, Luca looked at the exhausted yet smiling Antonio. "You're unbelievable." Antonio smiled softly. "I know." Luca rolled his eyes. "Idiot." "Fine. I'll marry you." Silence. Antonio blinked. "Really?" "Yes." For the first time in years, Antonio Landolfi completely forgot how to act like a dignified CEO. He hugged Luca so tightly that Luca squeaked, "Antonio, I can't breathe. I'm too happy." "Be happy from farther away." A few days later, Antonio awkwardly scratched his cheek. "There's something I should tell you." Luca looked suspicious. "What now?" Antonio coughed. "I'm not actually an alpha." "What?" "I'm an enigma." Luca stared, then stared harder, then sighed. "So, all this drama. And you saved the biggest plot twist for last?" Antonio looked guilty. "Eh, sorry." Luca reached up and cupped his face. "I don't care whether you're an alpha, an enigma, or an alien. You're still my Antonio." Antonio smiled so brightly that his assistants almost cried. Their emotionless CEO had finally smiled like a normal human being. The following week, a worldwide press conference was held. Antonio calmly announced, "I'm an enigma." And, "Luca Di Pietro and I are getting married." The internet exploded. Stock markets nearly exploded too. Comment sections became battlefields. One person simply wrote, "The rivals became husbands?" Another replied, "Peak romance." Their wedding became the grandest event of the decade. Crystal chandeliers, thousands of white roses, business tycoons from around the world. A 7-layer wedding cake. Antonio cried. Luca laughed at him. "You cried before I did." Antonio shamelessly admitted, "I've waited a year. I earned these tears." After marriage, they merged Landolfi Group and Di Pietro Group into one company. Working together somehow created even more chaos. Employees no longer feared Antonio. They feared Luca. Because Luca possessed the terrifying ability to destroy someone politely. Antonio simply watched proudly. "That's my husband." 6 months later, Luca stared at the medical report. Antonio." Antonio looked up. "Yes? I'm pregnant." Silence. Antonio blinked. Then, he fainted. Luca sighed. "Someone catch my husband." When Antonio woke up, he immediately hugged Luca. "I'm going to be a father." He happily announced it to literally everyone. His assistant, the gardener, the chef, the security guards, even the family dog somehow knew. 3 months into the pregnancy, Antonio repeatedly warned, "No cleaning, no heavy lifting, no climbing." Luca nodded obediently, then cleaned the storage room anyway. "I'll just organize one shelf." 5 minutes later, he found an old leather diary. "What's this?" Curious, he opened it. His breathing slowly stopped. It wasn't a diary, it was the original novel, the complete version, including everything he had never read. With trembling hands, he turned the pages and he finally learned the truth. Antonio never ordered Di Pietro's death. The men had lied, pretending to work for Antonio. As the original Di Pietro lay dying, a familiar laugh echoed nearby. Julia. She stepped into view smiling, laughing, mocking him. She admitted everything. She had manipulated Di Pietro for years. Used his love, made him believe Antonio loved her, then ordered her own men to kill him while framing Antonio. As Di Pietro took his final breath, he finally understood. The person he loved most had been using him from the very beginning. His last wish was simply to live happily somewhere else. Luca's tears fell onto the pages. "You fool. You deserve so much better." Just then, boing, System 001 appeared again, still looking like the fluffiest cotton ball in existence. It quietly floated beside him. "You know the truth now." Luca wiped his eyes. "So, I really only knew half the story." System nodded. "The real Di Pietro's final wish came true. He's happy. In your old world." And, the fluffy ball smiled warmly. "My mistake. Accidentally made your life better." Luca chuckled through his tears. "Sometimes, Mistakes really do become miracles. System happily spun in circles. I knew you'd understand. Luca gently poked the tiny Fluff. You're still an idiot. Heh heh. I know. That evening, Antonio found Luca smiling quietly on the balcony. He wrapped his arms around him carefully from behind. What are you thinking about? Luca gently rested his head against Antonio's shoulder. I'm thinking that maybe fate isn't something we're supposed to fear. Antonio kissed his forehead. No. It's something we create together. Inside. System 001 silently watched the couple before disappearing with a satisfied smile. Some stories ended in tragedy. Some stories never received the ending they deserved. But sometimes, one tiny mistake could rewrite destiny itself. And this time, the love rival didn't die. He became the male lead. He found a husband who loved him without reservation, a family waiting to grow, and a future filled with laughter, chaos, endless bickering, and unconditional love. For Luca Di Pietro, it was the happy ending he had unknowingly wished for, long before he ever transmigrated.